Okaeri! Welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're doing a very anticipated video. Today we're going to be filming my Cosmere ranking. For those of you who don't know, though I think most of you know by now, I am a huge Brandon Sanderson Cosmere fan. I haven't read much of his works outside of the Cosmere. I have read Skyward and Starsight, but I haven't read any of his other series like the Steelheart series. But within the Cosmere, I'm a huge fan, and I have quite a large collection of his books. Despite this, though, I haven't really done a lot of content about Sanderson on my channel because I read all of those books before I got behind the camera. I am doing a series on my channel called Books Before BookTube where I talk about those types of books, the ones that I read before I got behind the camera. And I do mention a couple books by Brandon Sanderson in those videos, so I'll be sure to put a link up above for those. But I haven't really gone into depth about any of them. So in honor of Rhythm of War coming out this month, the 4th book in the Stormlight archive, I figured I would do my first Sanderson video. And apparently I chose one that's probably going to piss some people off, but you know, come at me down in the comments. I have those I said what I said vibes today, so we'll see. For this tier ranking, I'm going to have 5 different sections, and I decided to spice it up a little bit by giving them Japanese names. For those of you who don't know or who are new to my channel, I live in Japan, and I like to sprinkle in aspects of that part of my life on this channel, so I thought it'd be pretty fun to give the rankings a Japanese name. Now, starting from the bottom, none of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere books are bad, so I didn't want the title of this bottom ranking to mean bad. Therefore, the word for the bottom ranking is going to be warukunai, which is not bad. The next one above that is going to be ma-ma, which is so-so. So a little bit better than not bad, but not necessarily really good either. The third level is going to be futsu, which is normal or average. Note that I mean normal or average in the world of Brandon Sanderson, not the world of books as a whole, so don't go clutching your pearls just yet. The 4th level is yoi, or good. It's as simple as that. That good shit. The final top tier is saiko, which means the best. Can't top it. One last point before I start ranking is that I want to say that none of his novellas or short stories are included in this, so we don't have any Edge Dancer or Dawn Shard or Arcanum Unbounded in this ranking. It's just the full-length novels. Starting off in the Warukunai tier, we have one book in this tier, and that is The Well of Ascension from Mistborn. This is the 2nd book in the series. And honestly, I forgot how big she is. My goodness, that is a chunker. It's been quite a while since I've read Mistborn, probably almost 2 years now, and it's been a long time since I've held these books. But this book is the only one for me in the Warukunai tier. I did enjoy Mistborn, but you'll see through this ranking, I have some unpopular opinions on this series in general. I did really enjoy the expansion of the magic system and the world building in this book. But when you have a middle book in the series that really focuses on expanding those aspects of the book, it's typically through the characters. You learn with the characters. And that's not different in this book. That is the way that Brandon Sanderson expanded the world. However, I did not connect with the characters in Mistborn very well at all. I don't like Vin that much. She was just kind of meh for me. And Elend also was meh. So because I didn't connect with the characters, I wasn't super invested in their growth. And since that's a huge part of this book is character growth to get the characters where they need to be by the 3rd book, it just wasn't my favorite reading experience. Plus, I hate Zane so much. What was the point of him in this book? I know what his narrative point was, but that could have been done, that narrative structure to help the growth of another character, that could have been done for that character without him. And I really did not enjoy any of the time that he was on screen. and screen. The pages in this book. When he was here, I did not enjoy any of that time spent with him. So, yeah, not my favorite, honestly. Although I did like, as I mentioned, the expansion of the magic system. Moving to the second level, Mama, I have 2 books in this tier. The first one is Warbreaker. Now, I actually started reading Brandon Sanderson with the Stormlight Archive, and I'll talk more about how that happened when the Stormlight Archive comes up in this video, but the second series or book that I picked up in the Cosmere was Warbreaker. And I think that this book was done a disservice in that regard because, you know, the Stormlight Archive is Brandon Sanderson's, like, epic dream world, you know? He's been planning it for a really, really long time, and he's finally executing it after all of these years of planning it. And so I expected that same level of epicness, I think, when I picked up Warbreaker. As it stands right now, Warbreaker is a standalone. I know Brandon said that he does want to expand this world, so hopefully in the future we'll get that. But I think that my enjoyment of this book was hindered because of the expectations I had going in, because I didn't do, you know, a lot of research about this particular book before I picked it up. I just was in, oh, I need more of this author, more Brandon Sanderson, Cosmere kind of mood. And so I really do want to reread this book, because when I think about it now, I think I'm going to enjoy it a lot more because I remember loving the characters in this book a lot. I mean, Lightsong and Nightblood are 2 of my favorite characters within the entire Cosmere, and I really, really want to revisit them with the new context that I have, having read pretty much all of the Cosmere at this point. This is the only book in the Cosmere, though, that I don't think I have a full grasp on the magic system. Brandon Sanderson is pretty straightforward in his writing, and he's usually really good at establishing the rules for his hard magic systems, but I remember reading this and kind of being like, maybe I understand this? Like, I wasn't 100% on board. So I really would like to revisit this book soon and give another crack at understanding the magic system fully as well. The second book in the Mama category is The Alloy of Law. This is the first book in Mistborn Era 2. So after you finish the first era, Brandon Sanderson wrote a second era that jumps forward to way into the future after the events of the first era. Before I picked this book up, I did a bit more due diligence than I did with Warbreaker, and I went into it knowing not to expect the same environment and the same kind of world building that was in Era 1. So I went into it already expecting something a bit lighter than the first era, and let me tell you, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I'm a huge character-based reader, as I'm sure you can already tell from the books that I've gone through already, and I think you can really, really see the development and the growth in Brandon Sanderson's character-based writing in this world with this series, because the interpersonal connections and relationships between the characters is on point, at least between Wax and Wayne in this book. So I thought that that kind of dynamic duo kind of relationship that didn't hit so well for me in Mistborn Era 1 really hit in Mistborn Era 2. I also loved the steampunky vibes of this book. I've never really delved into steampunk fantasy before, and not much after this, to be honest, but after reading this second era, it's something that I'm definitely interested in diving more into because I thoroughly enjoyed that kind of atmosphere in this book. And I loved seeing how Brandon Sanderson had developed the magic system to continue as times go forward, you know? So it's not that the system can only exist in this more medieval, you know, old school type of world, more traditional fantasy style. It can exist as the characters move forward in time as well. And I just loved the exploration of that here. What keeps this in the Mama category, though, was that the female characters didn't seem to get as much love or weren't as well developed as the male characters in this book, and I found them to be kind of flat. Also, I kind of just wanted a little bit more. Even though I went in with the expectation knowing, I mean, look at this size compared, you know, to the other Mistborn books, it's not going to be as much, but I'm just a world building nut. So even though I went in with that expectation, I did finish this book feeling like, I want a little bit more entering tier 3, 普通. I have 2 books in this tier as well. The first one is going to be The Hero of Ages. Again, Jesus, this is so much bigger than I remember. I'm gonna say that for all the Mistborn books, I think. But this is the 3rd book in Mistborn Era 1. Now, I know for some people, the end of this book is peak Sanderlanche. Like, this is the best ending that they've read ever. For those of you who don't know, Sanderson has the tendency to, at the end of his books, just bombard the reader with plot twist after revelation, and all of these little things throughout the story come together, like, all at once, and it's called the Sanderlanche, and this book is definitely the epitome of that. However, at the risk of becoming a broken record, I didn't connect with the characters so much, so that Sanderlanche didn't have that like emotional hit that it really seemed to have for a lot of people. So for me, what puts this book higher than The Well of Ascension, the 2nd book, is I loved the action sequences here, and the payoff of those plot threads was fantastic. You can see that Brandon Sanderson knew what the ending was going to be throughout the whole series, and you can tell that he was kind of weaving his way towards this the whole time. And that revelation of when an author has put all that time and effort is fantastic as a reader. So I loved that aspect of this book, and I did find, again, the magic system just continuously is expanded perpetually because it's Sanderson, and I really enjoyed that part of this book too. And the one character that I truly did connect with gets an ending in this book that is just so bittersweet, and I don't think that character could have ended any other way. So I think that that alone almost makes up for my lack of connection to the other characters. The 2nd book in the Futsu tier is, I forgot the name, Shadows of Self. Shadows of Self, the 2nd book in the 2nd era of Mistborn. Now, this book is a step higher from Alloy of Law because Brandon Sanderson continued, in my opinion, the path of being able to write really good witty banter and relationships between characters, and he started to pull in the female characters in this book as well and give them a bit more depth. I just remember having so much fun when I was reading this book. And don't get me wrong, I love a thick boy, and I love Brandon Sanderson's heavy world building that you can just, dive headfirst into. But it was pretty nice to see Brandon Sanderson's style writing with a more light hand, and I could just kind of pick this book up at any time and continue on with the story without having to kind of, backtrack and remember where I was in the world, that kind of thing. And that was just really enjoyable. Moving on to the 4th tier, Yoi, which is that good shit, like I said earlier. There are 3 books in this tier, and all of these books sucked me in from page 1 to the last page, and at no point in my reading experience did I have a lull in my enjoyment. The first one is The Final Empire, so the 1st book in the Mistborn trilogy. Now, I know it's a really controversial opinion to have the 1st book of the Mistborn series be the top ranking one in the 1st era, but I just loved discovering this world in the beginning. The fight scenes that are used to establish the magic system in this 1st book are fantastic, and as soon as I started reading them, I knew that I was going to be hooked. Also, in this 1st book, we're introduced to the characters, but we aren't forced to have a connection to them in order to, enjoy the world building, because we're not at that point in the story yet. So for me, that hadn't become a problem yet. So I was just like a kid in a candy store when I first read this book, like, oh, what's this? What's this magic power? How do you use that? What does this metal do? And it was just wonderful to jump into the world like that. So I have really, really good fond memories of picking up this book. And I think that this is one of the 1st books that showed me how much of a hard magic system fan I am, because I don't mind soft magic systems, but I think this is the book that really showed me how much I can enjoy a hard magic system when it's done well. I also loved Brandon Sanderson's exploration of the concept of the hero already failing. So we're entering this story already on the tail end of what's typically, the hero's journey in a fantasy setting. And I really liked the way that Brandon Sanderson handled that. The next book in the Yoi tier is Oathbringer, the third book in the Stormlight archive. This is a huge level up in size from like the books I've been holding up until this point, but it's just gorgeous, and I love these UK hardcovers. As soon as I collected all the paperbacks, I knew that I had to have the hardcovers to match, so I pre-ordered the Oathbringer UK version because, you know, I live in Japan, so basically it's all the same to me. You know, it has to come, you know, the shipping is basically the same, whether it's the American version or the UK version, so I just picked the one that I like. So I have the UK version, although I do think that the American versions are higher quality. Like, I don't know, the binding on these doesn't seem too secure, but the dust jacket is gorgeous. As I mentioned earlier, I started my Brandon Sanderson Cosmere journey with the Stormlight archive. I was just walking through my library here in Japan and I saw The Way of Kings on a shelf, and I just thought that looks like something that I could really get into. Looks epic, looks interesting, and so I checked it out. Little did I know what I was getting into. I mean, as soon as I read that book, best believe the other two were checked out right away because I was hooked. And I'll get more into that when The Way of Kings comes up. But the rest is history. All of Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive books take me quite a long time to read physically. I mean, it shouldn't be shocking. Oathbringer is how many pages? 1,242 pages. So it does take me quite a while to work through these, but I always enjoy every second of reading them. However, Oathbringer is in the Yoi tier because there were portions of this book where I felt a bit bored, and I wasn't inclined to pick up the book in the way that I was with the first two. It's been over a year since I've read this book, and I am doing a reread. I just finished Words of Radiance, and so I'm going to be picking this up hopefully soon via audiobook, because I want to read this before Rhythm of War comes, because I don't remember those little details. So because I haven't read it for over a year, I don't remember exactly what those things were that made me feel a little bored, but I do remember just halfway through this book there was a lull for me, and I didn't pick it up as often as I would have expected. So that leaves this in the fourth tier rather than the top tier. One thing I do remember really clearly though is I loved getting to know Dalinar's backstory. I mean, this is an example of how to perfectly execute a redemption arc, because we learned some very unsavory things about this character that we've really come to care for. And it would be pretty easy for an author to just kind of take a swing and a miss when you introduce something that heavy, but Brandon Sanderson knocked it out of the park, and I think it's a really, really successful redemption arc in the end. The third and last book in the Yoi tier is The Bands of Mourning. So this is the third book in Mistborn Era 2, and I loved this book. It's, you know, each book in this series gets a little bit thicker, so this is still not thick by Brandon Sanderson standards, but if you compare it to the first one, well, let me get it. If you compare to Alloy of Law here, you can see that the thickness increased greatly by the time the third book came out. And to me, that was the best of both worlds. It gave me that little extra world building and the plot that I wanted from the first book, combined with the fun and the witty banter, again, that was present throughout this entire series. Plus, this last book, what Brandon Sanderson did with Steris was amazing. I loved her in this book, and in the first book she's essentially a caricature, as I mentioned, but by the third book she has been fleshed out and developed in such a wonderful way, and I loved her interactions with Wayne and Wax in this book, and it was just fantastic. Plus, I am a mythology nut, and I love finding out about like gods and origin stories in the real world and in books. And in this book, you get to kind of dabble in that aspect of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, and I loved how the ending of this book kind of combined that greater Cosmere universe, like workings, into this world. I want to read this again so bad. It was so much fun. Okay, finally, we are in the top tier, the psycho tier. These books cannot be beat. I am obsessed with them, and I'm gonna have to control myself with how much I'm gonna wanna like splurge about them in this section, because this is not a book review video, it's just a ranking video. But I'm in love with these books. They have my heart. The first one is The Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight archive. Now, as I mentioned, when I was walking through my library and I just kind of casually saw this thick-ass, fantasy book that I'd never heard of before, and I picked it up, I did not know what I was getting into. And as soon as I read the prologue, I knew that I had just found something that was going to have a big impact on my reading life. And here we are. The world building, the magic system, the fight scenes, the characters, everything is fantastic in this book. I pretty much have no complaints at all. I just reread it at the end of October as an audiobook, and it was my first time doing the audiobook version, and I would just sit and stare at my wall, but instead of seeing my wall, I was seeing Roshar, because the descriptions were so rich. I could taste Roshar, I could see it. And that was an experience that I don't usually have with audiobooks. All of that is due to the time and the care and the love that Sanderson has put into every single aspect of this world. I think I might do some in-depth reviews on my channel of the individual books in the Cosmere in the future, so I'm going to go ahead and stop myself there before I go into any detail, because I assume if you're watching this video, you've probably read all of the Cosmere. Or if you haven't read it, you're not coming here looking for, in-depth reviews or spoilers. So we're not going to go too far into this, but just know that this was the best possible introduction that I could have had to Brandon Sanderson. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as an intro to the Cosmere or Brandon Sanderson to someone who's not a big fantasy reader, because as you can see, she's thick. The paperbacks are into 2 books and the hardback is over 1,000 pages. By the way, if you know anyone selling the UK edition of the Way of Kings hardback, I'm interested. I am paying $500 for it, because those exist, but it's pretty much impossible to get it. So if you know anyone selling it or you don't want your copy, hello, hi, message me, please. I really want it for my collection. That aside, though, if you're new to fantasy, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as the intro to the Cosmere, just because of the size and the depth of the world. But for someone like me, who's been a fantasy nut for a really long time, that wasn't off-putting at all. And honestly, there was no better intro into the Cosmere than The Way of Kings. Okay, one detail note is Lopin and Rock, they're the true heroes of this story. I love them so much. The second book in the Psycho tier is Elantris. Now, I know that this is kind of a controversial opinion, but Lena, over on Sufficiently Advanced Lena, is with me on this. Maybe it's just the 2 of us in the whole world. But I adore this book. A lot of Cosmere fans don't consider this one of Brandon Sanderson's best works because it is, I believe, his first published Cosmere novel. Because of this, a lot of Cosmere fans think that the world building and the magic system in Elantris is a little clunkier, which I don't really see, honestly. This book is less action-packed than his other books, I will say that. It's more of like a character study of almost humankind as a whole. I just loved how Brandon Sanderson dives into religion, societal structures, morality, what makes a person good, what makes them bad, and the fact that most people exist in this gray area in between, and what really makes humans click. And that was done so well, I think, in this book. Also, the main character, Raoden, is just a Cinnabon, and he needs to be protected at all costs. I love him so much. And so I think that also had a really big impact on how much I love this book because of my love for the main character. But regardless, I think that this book raises some fantastic questions about humanity, and I loved the way that Brandon Sanderson handled those questions. Finally, we have reached my favorite Brandon Sanderson book inside the Cosmere, and that is, without a doubt, Words of Radiance. I just reread this book. I finished it yesterday. Look at how much I've tabbed this bitch up. I mean, there is not a page without a tab in it. And I just adored every second of this. Each book in the Stormlight archive gives us the backstory of one of our main characters. So the first book is Kaladin. The second book, Words of Radiance, is Shallan. The third book is Dalinar. And this character study of Shallan is fantastic. I love her. She is the most morally gray character, and I think it's fantastic. Plus, the interactions of the characters here with their spren. If you don't know, the spren in this book are like, you can think of them kind of like akin to animal companions. They're not animals, but you can think of them that way. And they don't think as people do. The interactions between Kaladin and Syl and Pattern and Shallan in this book gave me life. I loved it. Plus, continuing on from the Way of Kings, Rock and Lopen. I'm telling you, they are the unsung heroes of this story. And the one scene of that one character when they are in Lopen's house near the end of this book had me cracking up. It's fantastic! The kind of moral questions that I brought up when I was talking about Elantris are also present here. You know, what makes a person good, what makes a person bad, and this is really well explored through a gray character like Shallan. I also mentioned that I'm really into mythology and finding out, you know, the backstory of the gods and the creation myths of fantasy worlds. And this book starts to give you those pieces that, like, the questions were established in the Way of Kings. And then some of the answers start to come through in this book. And it's fantastic. Also, that one scene with that one quote, everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say this, that established the world hopping that Sanderson has clearly been, you know, putting the seeds out for, gave me life. I was cheesing so hard when I read that line. I just felt so much joy when I was reading this book. The entire thing was a treat, except when Elhokar was on the page. I hate Elhokar. All of these like orange tabs mean like frustration or anger. Pretty much every orange tab was when Elhokar was on the screen, because sweetie, I'm not about that. So besides Elhokar, this book is just pure joy for me. And that's why this is at the top of this list. That concludes my Cosmere ranking video. Let me know in the comments down below what your ranking is. What would you put in each of the 5 tiers? Or would you add another tier? I'd love to debate and have these discussions with you down below. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!